Awesome. Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1722, Witches of Warboys. And you're probably going, Witches of Warboys? What the heck is she up to now? So I have to say, I wasn't sure if I would actually make it here today. My internet went out completely this morning. I was actually getting online at 8:55 this morning. I was getting online for a 9 o'clock meeting with clients, and I had zero internet connection. Like, it was like dead, even though the thing said it had a green light. And what the heck's going on? So I rebooted it, and it came up with yellow, and then it went to red, and it just flashed red. And I was like, huh. And then I was trying to text out on my phone, and it wouldn't go out. And then I said, oh, hang on, because I'm with T-Mobile, and I have a house internet thing, which doesn't work very well here because the signal's not great in this particular area, but it works for the phone. So I thought, well, let me try that. And so I'm trying to get it, and I can't get on the internet with that. And then it wasn't until like about a couple of hours ago, I remembered, oh yeah, I had that disabled on the account, but I still have it on the account where I'm paying like $9 a month to keep it there. So I thought that's why I couldn't get online. But 30 minutes later, the internet, and I'm calling the internet service company, and finally got through to, because my phone wasn't working, finally got through to them at 9:25. And as the person answers the phone, my internet thing goes green. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So we got back on the internet, and it's been running amazingly ever since. I had no drag on it, nothing. It has been awesome. And that was even after unplugging it and rebooting my phone, rebooting the computer. I was rebooting everything and still had problems. So anyway, tonight's topic is the Witches of Warboys. And you're probably going, what the heck? So I was going through one of my boxes, one of my mini boxes. I was going through one of those and came across some books. And I thought, oh, what books do I have? What books do I have in this box? Because it's half books and half filing stuff. And I'm looking at the filing stuff thinking, yeah, that's probably all going to get shredded. But what books do I have in there? And I thought, well, and so I started pulling up the books, and I pulled up this one that's called The Witches of Warboys. And you can see there's people being hung there. Yeah. So this book was written in 1993 about an incident that took place in Warboys in, hang on, I got to read that again, 1593. So there was, a few years between those two, 400 years. So the 400-year anniversary of the hanging of this particular family, and because they were found guilty of being witches, this book was written. So, but what had happened, and I'm like looking, and I'm like flipping, doing this through the book, and a picture caught my eye, and I thought, I've got to go back to that. And in case if you have not been following, Warboys plays a prominent role in my ancestry. A lot of my ancestors, a lot of my Eakins ancestors come from Warboys, which was in Hunt. Actually, I'm going to show you on a map real quick. Go to this one. So where that red dot is, that red thing is where it says the manor house. That is the place that my ancestors lived in Warboys. So you can see how far away it is from London. It's kind of equidistance between London and Birmingham over there. I don't know. You can see Cambridge right here. So this is where the manor house was in Warboys. And if we zoom in, here's Warboys, little town. And the marker is actually in the wrong place, because this church here is the church that's literally in the front yard of the manor house. And if we go over here, it's not going to show it. This here is the manor house actually right here. And when you go to if we go to the layers, so here is the manor house right here. Here is the church that's in the front yard. And if we go to street view, there was a street view that came up here. I think it was this one. There is the church, and there is the glimpse of the manor house in behind right there through the trees. So that's where it was in Warboys. And we'll go back to this one. Oh, go back. Hang on. Out of that one. Close that. Back to there. And so that is where my ancestors lived for a number of years. And you can see it's not a very big town. It's just this little town in a county called Huntingdonshire at the time, and Huntingdonshire later got merged into Cambridge. So it's now part of Cambridge. But I've got ancestors that came from this area here, St. Ives, that was all part of Huntingdonshire. Ramsey, I think, is north. That was a different one. I think that's a different county. But this is an area where all my ancestors, where a majority of my ancestors came from. So talking about Warboys, going back to Warboys, and we'll just get out of that. So now you have a geography lesson for the day. So now you know which part of England we're in. So I'm flipping through this book and I come across a very familiar picture and I'm like, wait, hang a sec. Why is that there? This is the picture of the manor house. Here is the church. Here is the churchyard with the cemetery out front of the manor house. And so you can see the gate there. So the occupants of the house would come through the gate for church services. So you can see that there. And underneath it says, Illustration 5, Church of Mary Magdalene, Warboys, and the manor home of the Throckmorton family. The Throckmorton. And I'm like, who are the Throckmortons? Well, if I read the back of the book first, it says here, the elderly couple, Alice and John Samuel, and their young daughter Agnes were hanged on the 6th of April, 1593. So that was, 431 years ago, for bewitching the 5 daughters of the prominent Throckmorton family and for causing the death of Lady Cromwell. Now, if you are a history buff, Lady Cromwell has I think she was the grandmother. We're going to go back in here and read. But there is a connection to Oliver Cromwell. So if any of you know your English history and Oliver Cromwell, that's part of that family. They were just 3 of many hundreds of people, mainly women, hanged, burned, or drowned on the accusation of witchcraft during the 16th and 17th centuries. But their story had a particular resonance down through the centuries and is still hang on, it's trying to read white on black. Relevant today because they were convicted largely as a result of the behavior of 5 young girls over a period of years. So I haven't actually read this book yet. It's one that I got from, I ordered it through the Huntingdonshire Family History Society, which is, of course, part of Cambridge. And it's actually part of the Cambridgeshire City Council, County Council. But they were talking in here. Where did I read it? So the Throckmortons were very well connected, very well connected. It turns out that they were connected locally. The extremely wealthy Sir Henry Cromwell, grandfather of the famous Oliver and lord of the manor of Warboys, was a close friend of the family. He and his wife, the Lady Cromwell, named in the title. Other relatives include Gilbert Pickering, later Sir of Tickmarsh Grove in Northamptonshire. That's where some of the other ones come from, the other Eakins, where two of the girls spend long visits. Uncle Henry Pickering of Cambridge represents one of the many links the family has with the university, where there's much debate on the subject of witchcraft at the time. Dr. Barrow, who attended Jane's one of the girls, was an eminent Cambridge doctor and long-standing friend of Robert Throckmorton. The Throckmorton family was big. The rector of the church in front, he was also part of he married one of the daughters. I don't know. Like I said, I've just started reading this. He married a sister of the Throckmortons. Robert Throckmorton was the father, and his sister married the guy who became the rector. Darrington was the last name. And the Darringtons had 13 children. Yes. So a lot of this happened also during the plague as well, because it mentioned in here that the Darringtons had 13 children, 5 who died in infancy. And so their belief at the time was babies were christened only a few days old to ensure that if they died, they would go to heaven. The belief being that the child's soul belonged to the devil until it had been baptized. Isn't that interesting? So, but the girls in age that caused the problem with the Samuels family were age 15, 14, 11, 9, and 8 at the time that this started. And from what I can gather with the quick glance through here that I have had, is that these 5 girls basically caused issues for the Samuels, who were later convicted of being witches and all hung together. Now, this is my red book. This red book is very important because my mum put together this red book. In this red book, there is a copy in here. This here is one of my, I think she's a second grand aunt. This is Patty C. Eakins. She was born Maggie. Oh, I can't remember now. She lived in the manor house and never married. She was a spinster, and she is my second great grandfather's daughter. Hang on, is it daughter or niece? It's either a daughter or a niece. But Patty C. Eakins wrote this book, and it's quite lengthy. It goes all the way down to here. It's this thick. Wrote this book about her life living in the manor house, as well as her years in Cambridge. So she was in the manor house from 1858 to 1889, and then living somewhere else in Cambridge from 1889. Oh, they just did it for a year. And there was I don't know how many original books were done, but my great aunt had a copy of an original book, which she loaned to my mum so she could make these photocopies of it. And then there was one that is with the current owner of the manor house. They have one there, the residents at Warboys, and the library in Cambridge also has a copy. But the story doesn't end there. When my parents were in England one time, they were in England, they had contacted the current owner of the manor house and told them who they were, their connection to the manor house, and they actually went and spent some time with them. And this guy had done up this thing here on the history of the house, which is really cool, like all the people that lived in it. And then these were pictures. I think my parents took these pictures. These were pictures that my parents took of the manor house as you're driving up to it. Yes. Yeah, this is as you're driving, as you're, the outside. But what was interesting, so after I picked up this book and I read this, I went and got my red book and had a look here, and it states here, let's see, where are we? So in 1540, after dissolution of the monasteries, the manor farm and marshes were granted to Sir Richard Williams, who took the name of Cromwell. His grandfather's father had been Thomas Cromwell, Earl of Essex, and was beheaded that same year. Sir Richard's wife was the daughter of the Lord Mayor of London. Their son, Sir Henry, his first wife was also the daughter of the Lord Mayor, and she died in 1584. His second wife, Susan, who became ill in the house and was part of the infamous witch story. And I'm like, why do I not remember reading about a witch story? Maybe that's what prompted me to get the book in the first place. The story starts in 1589. The Throckmortons were leaseholders of the house. The Cromwells were the lords of the manor, and there is some debate as to when they moved in. But as all their children's christenings were recorded in the Warboys registers, it must have been before 1574, because that's when the oldest daughter Jane was mentioned in the register. The register was meticulously kept by the rector, the Reverend Domington. For example, there was 118 deaths in 1557 when the plague struck Warboys. That's a lot for that little town. The Throckmortons were prominent at court. One was an ambassador to France in 1572. Another was a banker who gave his name to Throckmorton Street. It is interesting that families maintained their influences by different parts of the family having different religious affiliations. For example, Francis plotted to help Mary regain the throne. I wonder if that was Mary, Queen of Scots. Queen Mary, yeah. One of the Throckmortons was Bess, who married Sir Walter Raleigh. He's another famous person in the US, and not in the US, in the UK in their history. The Throckmortons were close friends of the Cromwells, who have all stayed in the house. A book of the time describes the house as having a large hall entered directly by the front door with an ingle nook fireplace. In the late 16th century, witch mania was rampant in this part of the country. In Huntingdonshire, Matthew Hopkins, the notorious witch-finder general, condemned 20 women to death in just 3 years before meeting a bloody end in Blantyshire. The Samuels were hanged in April 1593. Not surprisingly, the Throckmortons moved on. And then it goes through all of the people who bought it, sold it, and everything else. So there's a lot of history in that little house. And that manor house was first bought, let's see, the first mention of the manor of Warboys as a gift of the Archbishop Dunstan of Ramsey Abbey in 974. And this was confirmed by King Edgar in 974, Edward the Conqueror, William the Conqueror in 1077, Edward III in 1334, Pope Alexander in 1178, and Pope Gregory in 1229. And then it gives the only evidence of a building situated where there are traces that were probably a tithe barn on the lawn behind the west end of the church. So that's how old that house is that my ancestors lived in after all the witchery stuff. So I thought it was kind of interesting that I came across this book. And it may be because I had read that stuff in here that I went and ordered the book about the witch story. Because I was like, what's the witch story? It's connected to the house that my ancestors lived in. And so I wanted to more about it. So I haven't actually read this book. I've done a quick glance through here. But I'm going to do a more detailed read of it because there is just so much history in this little book. Especially with the connections that this family had. Plus, of course, it's part of the genealogy of the house. And believe it or not, you can actually, there are genealogists who specialize in the genealogy of a house. They will go in and find the story of the house. Like the person who wrote up that yellow thing had gone through and found all the owners. Were there any famous connections? Were there, connections to famous people? Was there anything that took place, any historical events that took place in and around the house or in the area that the house was? And when you want to put something on a get a house on a historic registry and stuff like that, there's a house genealogist that will go in and research all those records. So genealogy is not just for people; it's for houses too, as well as buildings. So I thought this is kind of interesting. I'm going to read this and then I'll come back and give you another report on the Witches of Warboys and talk about how the 5, what are the name of those kids again? How the 5 Throckmorton girls plotted. Yeah. Because it says here that they were convicted largely on the result of the behavior of 5 young girls over a period of years. So I'm interested to see what behaviors the girls were doing, what their behavior was like that convinced people that the Samuels family, and why the Samuels family was picked to be the ones that were the witches that had bewitched these 5 young ladies. So I will keep you posted on that. It's just a short book. It's like 80 pages, but it's tiny writing. It's going to take me a while. And then they have a piece of paper in the front here because there's actually a typo in the book. And this piece of paper says, page 15, date of the christening for Jane should be 1580, not 1581. So, yes, I will put that back in there at that particular place. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to read this to find out all about the history and things like that. So my question for you tonight is, oh, okay, I got it. All right. Do you have any connection to any witch trials in your own ancestry? Was it somebody in your family a witch hunter? Were they accused of being a witch? What history do you have in your family that goes back to any witch trials anywhere? Because they had the witch trials in England, they had the witch trials in Salem. So, and I know they had them down in Williamsburg as well. When Brad and I were at Williamsburg one year, we had Josh with us, the youngest one. And one night we went to witness a court case. They had the courthouse all there. I mean, if you've never been to Williamsburg, it is a fascinating place to go. It is absolutely amazing. I loved it there. I want to go back again and explore it even more. But they have this court the old courthouse there, and they actually hold trials in there, and they reenact the trials that were that happened around that time, because everybody's in costume and everything else, and it's just really, really cool. And depending on where in the line you are as to where you get to sit. And so this time we were sitting in the jury seats, but our first time in there, and it was it was a pirate. It was a pirate. It was a pirate trial. It was hilarious. It was so funny. We were all rolling around laughing. The bantering that was going backwards and forwards between the pirate and his wench was just unreal. They kept us highly, highly entertained. And I think in the end they were found not guilty. If I remember correctly, they were found not guilty. So then we thought, well, let's go see what the next night's one was. And it was about this woman who was being tried as a witch. And we got there early, and so we got to sit up. And when you go into the courthouse, they have like the public seats here, the jury seats are over here, and then there's big U shape, and the judge sits in the middle of the U shape. And then there's I can't even remember what position in the community these people were, but that they sat on the other side of the horseshoe with the judge in the middle. And so I was actually sitting next to the judge. Then Brad was next to me, and Josh was next to him. And this was for the witch trial. The acting, and this was so different from the night before, where we'd had a lot of bantering, a lot of laughter, a lot of, they were just basically ignoring the judge is what they were doing, and having their own bickering going backwards and forwards, and the judge had to keep reining them in to try and get this trial done. But the pirate and the wench kept having this battle backwards and forwards between them, which was hilarious. But anyway, the next night was the witch trial. It was very, very different, very dramatic. It was a completely different vibe in this place. I thought she was innocent because I didn't think that the witnesses had actually proved their case. But no, she was actually found guilty. And I can't remember her name though, but she was found guilty, but she was not executed, because it wasn't long after that for some reason she wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't long after that they stopped all the executions with the witch. They stopped doing the witch trials. They stopped all executions and all that. And so she ended up living on a farm outside of I think it was a farm outside of Williamsburg, where she lived to be like in her 80s. And even at the end of the court trial, when they told you what had actually happened at the court trial back when it was done in the 1700s. Yeah, 1700s. I think it was 1700s. Yeah, around in the era when that trial was done, they actually read out what had actually happened at the trial, why she was not executed, and they said there's not much known about this woman after her court case, after she was found guilty, but it is believed that she lived on a farm nearby until the ripe old age of like 83. It's not known if she got married and had children or anything like that. And what was interesting is that after we got home from our trip to Williamsburg, it was probably about 3 or 4 months later, I'm reading this is the day when Brad and I used to read the newspaper. I'm just glancing through the news. I didn't actually read, I was just glancing through, and it had there about how the governor of Virginia had pardoned a witch. And I'm like, wait a sec. And I started reading the article, and the article was the governor of Virginia at the time had pardoned this witch that we had seen being tried in the reenactment in Virginia. Some 400 years after she had been found guilty of being a witch, she was pardoned. And I thought, wow. And so Brad happened to be at work that day. So I called him. I said, you're not going to believe what I just read in the paper. I said, you got a minute to talk? He says, yeah. I said, you're not going to believe what I just read in the paper. And I told it to him. He's like, really? I said, yeah. I said, then that woman in here. I said, there's that article that the governor of Virginia had pardoned her. And so, had pardoned this woman who had been accused of being a witch. That happened to be the one that we saw in the reenactment in Williamsburg. So that was kind of cool to have that all nicely tied up and everything else. I says, but they're like 400 something. They were like 400 years late. But hey, she has a clean record now, just a little on the late side. But anyway, so what interesting stories do you have in your family tree that could be related to witch trials? Do you have ancestors that were either witch hunters? Do you have ancestors that had played some role in the witch trials that were going on in different areas around the world, during the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s? Or do you have any ancestors in your line that were accused of being a witch? And who was it? Trying to remember who the celebrity was that was on Who Do You Think You Are? and one of them had an ancestor that had been accused of being a witch, and this is when she before this person got, and it was like fifth, sixth, seventh great grandmother or something, and on that one, that accused of being a witch, and she says, "Well, obviously she didn't get executed, or I wouldn't be here." And I thought that's pretty accurate. Yep. Because of the age the person was at the time that they were accused. And so yes, that was an interesting tie-in as well. So there's all these different tie-ins to different people and these different trials that were witch trials that were on at the time. And like I said, in the 15th, 16th, and 1700s, or the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, more in the 16th and 17th centuries were the witch trials, but they're very interesting to go back and have a look at. So I'm now found this book again. I'm eager to dive into it to see what was going on at the time. And they said that in here, the author, Moira Tatum, comes to her own conclusions, and you get to read her opinion on what she thinks, the outcome. Hang on. Or what she thinks of the trials as to whether they were guilty or not. So, just trying to quickly see. Yeah, she makes her own conclusions as to whether the Samuels were guilty of witchcraft or simply innocent victims of a childish prank that got out of control. So I'm curious to go through and read that and see what I come up with. So I will keep you posted on that. But that's it from us for this evening. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Hei konara.